You're listening to The Builder's Mindset with Mike DiGiovanni, presented by Amazing Mindsets. Welcome back to The Builder's Mindset. You've heard me say it before. Headlines love to profit on panic and negativity, but smart builders profit on fundamentals, operational discipline, and execution at every step of the game. But there is no shortage of negative headlines right now. And there's a huge shift actually that's happening in the supply chain and a little bit the installation world of things that I don't think most small to mid-sized builders are really attuned to or really like digging into the details of. It's not just about homes, and it's about who controls not just the flow of material that make or break our margins, but the labor is coming into play as well too. And we're going to get into it on this episode of The Builder's Mindset. So as I was doing research for this, I ended up going a bit down a little bit of a rabbit hole. I love, as you all know, I love watching the earnings reports. I love listening to them, and not just home builders. Sometimes, you know, the suppliers in the industry have good stuff to talk about. Apple, Google, you name it. But last week, Lowe's Home Improvement announced that they are acquiring FBM, Foundation Building Materials. I believe that's a Santa Ana, California. I think that's where they headquartered out of, really close to where we're based out of here in Irvine. It's a major building material distributor. The purchase price was $8.8 billion, and this comes off the heels of Home Depot just releasing their earnings, and their headline screamed housing slowdown and home improvement slowdown. If you look at the numbers, the story is very different. Now, I think it was last year Home Depot announced, I think it's GSM. And I forget exactly what that stands for, but that's another, I believe, large, focuses heavily on drywall, as FBM does. FBM does a lot of drywall distribution. So, you know, remodelers, pros, and yes, home builders like you and me, we're going to start to feel the ripple effects of these moves. Price, supply stability, and the way projects get financed are starting to and will get reshaped. Now, what is interesting about, as I started to really dig into this, I heard an analyst was talking about Lowe's and Home Depot, and they were actually talking about a bit of a slow up in the home improvement market because of interest rates. I think they felt that, you know, really needed lower interest rates. They were saying lower than 6 and potentially lower than 5.5 to really get that part of the industry moving again. Now, with that said, here's part of the truth. The Lowe's FBM deal isn't about drywall and fasteners. It's really more about control and hedging your future revenue, margins, and access. It's kind of, you know, a little bit of following sort of a similar playbook to what Lennar and Horton are kind of doing in their world of things on the home building side of things. But, you know, Lennar and Horton are, you know, they're really trying to say control the land. We talk here at the Builder's Mindset, we talk about land, but we don't focus on it. You know, our forte is really operational excellence, product development. But, you know, look, at the end of the day, if you control the land, you control building, right? I mean, that is a fact. Location. So a lot of these moves have to do with controlling labor, supply chain, and then also in some instances, we'll talk about this, hedging your margin and revenue vulnerability. So let's get it. So, you know, the larger players are leveraging their scale so that they can secure and lock up supply, labor, and being able to deliver what they deliver at an unbeatable cost advantage so that they become the absolute go-to. If we talk about Lennar, let's say, there are certain markets where Lennar is just so big and they have such ability from a liquidity standpoint, they can almost outprice all of the competition. When you look at, Lowe's and Home Depot, we're going to get to Walmart in a second. That was the rabbit hole. When you look at Lowe's and Home Depot, similar situation, right? With, let's say, whether it's tariffs or other things and costs and fuel that are driving up supply, either because they have distribution facilities, so they have deeper depths of stock availability at older inventory pricing, they can weather these storms of keeping prices down longer than their smaller competitors, can. And these companies have been around for a long time. And so it's about getting more control through leveraging your scale. So what's interesting, though, is if we look at what's happening, and we've been talking about this, so I don't think Lennar is doing this because they think the market is booming right now. I think they're doing it because the long-term fundamentals are undeniable, and then for them, there's a hedge that's going on that we're going to talk a little bit here in a second. The demand is there, and whoever controls the supply controls the future. And really, with where things are going now with affordability, whoever controls the supply along with the competitive number. All right. We're not in that world of things right now. Like when we were in COVID times, let's say 2021, 2022, and I was still working actively for a builder on the supply chain side of things. We almost didn't care what the price was if you could just get it. Supply was so constrained. It was more about availability. Right now, supply is not that big of a problem. Labor potentials are coming, and we'll talk about that in a second. But supply is pretty readily available, but it's about at what cost, and margins are getting pinched. So what I think and see happening here is, so as I'm listening to this analyst talk about the Home Depot call, and Home Depot's numbers were, not quite, I guess, as great as Lowe's per se. And so they were talking about what Home Depot and Lowe's are doing in terms of these markets they're getting into, whether it's, like I said, Home Depot, I think it was in the last 12 months, they bought GSM, which is a major drywall supplier. Now FBM gets bought by Lowe's. And then, oh, by the way, in April, I think it was, Lowe's announced they bought ADG, Artisan Design Group, which is interesting. Artisan Design Group is a designer and installer of flooring, cabinets, and countertops to, in my experience, primarily the new home construction industry. And so, we're going to talk a little bit about what I see going on. As this analyst was talking about, he wasn't very bullish on remodeling because he felt interest rates were going to hamper remodeling until they got below 6, and he wanted to see them come down below 5.5. What he was alluding to, though, was he said there's margin pressure on these big box home improvements, right? Typically, right, the Lowe's and Home Depot have historically been a combination of that. Yes, they've sold to contractors, but their primary business is DIY, right? Just people coming in, weekend projects. Oh, and guess what else is a big part of their business? Those things that you can also get at Walmart. He's talking about, like, cleaning supplies, even if it's industrial, like mops and buckets and cleaners and whatnot, that they are starting to experience pressure from Walmart. So I started digging in. I went and I listened a little bit of kind of what Walmart reported. And so kind of what's going on from Walmart's perspective, same thing. Large distribution facility, and they've been saying they're going to keep prices no matter what happens with tariffs and import costs. They're going to do everything they can to keep prices low as long as they can, so that they can continue to provide the value to their consumer. And that's kind of their thing. Like Walmart's the low price leader. Well, because they've been doing that, they're putting pressure and pinching on Lowe's and Home Depot for, let's say, think about the items that overlap Walmart and Home Depot. You're not able to raise your prices. It's putting a margin pinch on them. And I say this with the caveat, I believe Lowe's reported like a 33% gross margin. Now, take this for granted, is these companies have an insane amount of advertising expense, like insane, way more than home builders. They're like SG&A is like their SG&A. If I read the numbers correct, the SG&A for Lowe's for a quarter, it is larger than some of the top 20 home builders. I think even the top 15 revenue. So, but they're getting pressure. So, right. So what's happening is if you look at construction from the retail, which I would call like the do-it-yourself and very small, like handyman, small remodelers, to what they're calling the pro, and you're going to hear this term come up a lot because they talked about it a lot, so you're going to hear about it, the pro. And so from a pro, don't think home builder, they're saying the pro is like, we're talking now the general contractors who do remodels, like kitchen and baths and biggers. These are starting to get companies with scale. They're professional organizations. And then you've got the builder side of things, which is a different world. Now, here's where I think this is going to get very interesting, and these ripple effects are going to be like overlapping. It's not just one stone in the pond. I think we got 3 or 4 going in the pond. We look at this. What I see happening here is Home Depot has for quite some time dabbled and tried to get involved into the new home construction market. Not with any great scale, though, in my opinion. I have seen 2 posts, literally 2 in the last week on LinkedIn, talking about the Home Depot direct to the lot delivery system. Now, can they do it? I think they can. They just have to be committed. And the new home construction model is very low margin, but you make it on volume. It's a low margin, high volume, which is right up the alley of those companies. The problem that happens though is you've got timing has to be key. And this is where you're going to hear a lot of talk too about another reason for these purchases by Lowe's and Home Depot of companies like FBM, Artisan Design Group, GSM, is to try to squeeze out some of the margin that's in that part of the supply chain and pull it back towards the large capitalized company, the Home Depots and the Lowe's. But I've watched them struggle with this. Here's the biggest challenge in my opinion, and it's 2. It's the margin of volume, but I think I see Lowe's and Home Depot being used to that, just like Amazon. All those big guys are used to it. They scale and they can keep the price down. It's low margin. But the second thing that they've got to really iron out is home building, as I've described in the past. Home building is a manufacturing company, except we don't do it under cover of roof. So we're in the elements, and the workers don't sit in one place and an assembly line moves the product. The product doesn't move, and we have to like move all of the workers via the assembly line. So you think about it, like that house sits where it is, and the people have to come to that house, work through that house, and then move on to the next one. So it's kind of like, I like to call it, it's like the anti-assembly model, because it's outside and it's almost in reverse to some degree. So because of that, we don't have typically places to secure material. So material needs to arrive to the job site the day or the evening before, the late afternoon before it's really needed. Otherwise, every day it sits, you really increase the risk of theft. And then that theft is just bad for margins. Because once it comes to the job site, the builder owns it. Now the builder has to replace it. So the builders have historically moved away to this, a lot of them, to this what we call turnkey. Let the trade partner handle it so the trade partner can coordinate it. They know when they're going to show up. If they're not going to be there on Monday, they're going to come on Tuesday. It's their responsibility to call off the delivery Monday, and they have the delivery come Tuesday. So that is the conundrum. If anybody can figure out, it's Lowe's and Home Depot, because they are supply chain gurus and they have been for some time. But I think that's a big part of the challenge along with the margins. The other side challenge, and this is rumor and conjecture that I've heard over my 20 plus years in home building, is that the Lowe's and the Home Depot are the biggest buyers. I mean, these companies, I want to say, are like, I think they're like $100 billion of revenue a year. They are massive, massive companies. They like their scale, they like to control the supply chain, and they tend to dictate. There's a lot of product overlap between Home Depot and builders in terms of product type. and they like to control that from a cost and a sell perspective. And so that melding of those two worlds of things is going to be really interesting to watch. But let's get back to this retail pro builder. So if you're a Lowe's and a Home Depot and you're trying to hedge your bets on the competition of retail from the likes of Walmart, and let's see what happens with Target, because everybody thought Target was, kind of pooping the bed, but not to say that they're not, but now it turns out when we look at the Walmart's earnings report, Target doesn't look quite so bad. But they have a new CEO over at Target who started as an intern apparently, so we'll see. Maybe they turn things around. But they're putting pressure on the retail portion of Lowe's and Home Depot's business. So why wouldn't Lowe's and Home Depot start to go more into that pro model, that contractor remodel business, to hedge the retail part of their business? And then why wouldn't they, in doing that, go purchase an FBM who, wait for this, FBM sells to pros, but FBM also sells a lot of drywall to new home builders, small and national alike. There are certain home builders who have arrangements where they put partnerships together with the FBM. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how this works. And I think this plays into Lowe's and Home Depot's favor, because I'm much more bullish on remodeling in the next year or two than that individual was. And we do have rates coming down, and so we'll talk about that in the next episode. How much they come down, I don't know. I think a 0.5 point rate reduction helps remodelers and resellers more than it does new home sales, but that's a topic for another day. But if you look at the remodeling, and John Burns has a remodeler outlook that they do, they were saying in their remodeler outlook that a lot of pros are upgrading their outlook revenue for this year, even for 2025. They're pointing to sort of more moderately priced, shorter cycle, smaller projects. We're talking like just baths and small kitchens and things like that. That's where the momentum seems to be. I mean, think about it. If you're stuck in your house because you can't give up your 3% mortgage, and you really don't need to move because you don't really need another bedroom, and you're just trying to buy a little bit of time, you just redo your kitchen for 50 or 60 grand. It's not the end of the world. And now you gotta, your house is a little nicer, do something like that. So, and like financing, I have a neighbor of mine who does financing for this kind of stuff. I use the term HELOC, but I think there's all kinds of mechanisms now. Apparently there's contractor arranged credit. Like, deals are closing now, with people have equity in these houses. So, back to that example there, if you're in a market and you have a house that's valued right now, let's say at 750 grand, and let's say you bought it for, I don't know, 500, and you owe 3 on it, you have 450,000 in equity. To take out 50 to 75, even if it is at a 7 or 8% interest rate, if that's what you need to do to hold on to your cash and get your kitchen done, or if you just dip into your savings to get that done, people are doing that. And so that part of the business is moving. And I think we're starting to see companies like Lowe's and Home Depot, they want to get more in that world. And so you have drywallers. I think what you're going to see now is a drywaller who would typically do, let's say a drywaller who would do 40% work for new home construction, 40% for apartments, and let's say 20% for commercial and or remodel or whatnot. They might be moving that commercial remodel work up to 40% because it's available to them and the new home market's slowing a little bit for them. Well, if they're a purchaser from FBM or GSM, they're just going to increase their purchase. They're going to move their purchases from that new home world, going to the new home, and it's going to go to that world of things. So if that happens, because these guys are going to do what they need to do to stay busy, why not buy an FBM and help with logistics, help with buying power, try to get in. I mean, Lowe's and Home Depot buy a ton of drywall. So why not try to pull that supply together? And if you can even get your cost of drywall down even marginally, 0.5% on your existing volume plus that new volume, you can have massive, massive impacts on the bottom line of those combined companies. So, tariff and import costs are still squeezing a fair number of categories. Appliances, windows, anything imported. Lots of stuff still has to get imported. Even if it's made here, we still have lots of raw materials that are coming in. But, suppliers are getting pinched too, and they're trying to position and reposition themselves to get their costs as competitive as possible. Because, as we pointed out and noted, the margins for these retail and DIY channels are starting to get a little bit taxed, just like home builders are. So, what does this mean if you're not Lowe's or Home Depot and we start to look at what's going on here in some of these acquisitions? It means, stop thinking like a customer of these companies and start thinking like a competitor to them. Because in a sense, you're going to have to start thinking that way, because even if you're a home builder, you're competing with them for the same materials and resources from a cost perspective. You are actually, what's interesting now, and in some instances, I'll flip that around, you might be forced to think like a customer of Home Depot when you didn't before, because now you were buying, let's say, 60% of your drywall through drywallers, but through FBM. Well, that now is through Lowe's. So those dynamics of your supply chain are about to change and get dramatically different. The ADG thing is interesting because I would say their largest competitor is ILG, who I believe is larger than them. But ADG has gone through some massive growth, I would say, in the last 2 or 3 years. And so it's interesting now that Lowe's owns that because, as I said, Lowe's has historically sold cabinets, so has Home Depot. Now they have a more connected to the end user facility, and even that end user being home builders. So now they've got an in with home builders for flooring, cabinets, and countertops. And that ripple effect is going to have to play out over the next couple of years to see really how that goes. But you gotta, you have got to start, you smaller builders, 100 to 500 home, you got to start locking in strategic partnerships with local suppliers who can value your volume. There are smaller outfits out there. So hypothetically, or just as an example, let's say if you're not big enough to put a deal together with a Lowe's, maybe there's local lumber yards, look for those lumber yards that have, maybe regionally in the Atlanta area, he's got 3 shops or something, those are still around. And I would say, I hate to say it, but yes, Lowe's probably has the potential for the best price, but if they're looking now to really get deeper into the pro market with a hedge of their bets into also the home building market, what I would say is turn away from that market and start building relationships with the smaller regional lumber suppliers and drywaller suppliers and see what you can do from that perspective. If you're already a small builder who's doing a lot of business with FBM, lean in heavy to your partnership, your rep with that. And I would say you probably got, maybe it could be 6 to 18 months where we start to see those partnerships get challenged and repriced and restructured. All right. So you can't sit back and wait for prices to stabilize. We've talked about that. Lowe's and Home Depot aren't waiting. They're securing different avenues and channels of supply to build and leverage on their existing scale and grow it. They're investing billions to make sure they win while everybody else waits. Don't wait. We've talked about it. Get back to the fundamentals and the basics of what you do and how you do it. Make sure your product design is ideal. At the end of the day, the best way to save money on material is to pull material out of your home. And product design is the best way to do that. You can be more efficient with your design because taking 10 2x4s completely out of a house because you design it right, or removing 20 sheets of drywall because you design it right, is going to give you a bigger bang for your buck than just trying to renegotiate your pricing on 2x4s and drywall. And oh, by the way, when pricing goes up on one of those products, like they typically do at least once a year, or Random Lengths for lumber moves monthly, that's 10 or 15 or 20 of those that aren't even impacted at all by costs going up or down. It doesn't matter because it's not in the house. So look, here's where it starts to get personal. If you are a 100 to 500 home a year builder or a remodeler running a lean operation, you could be at risk of getting squeezed out. And not because you're not talented, and not because, you know, you're not playing offense. The big guys are really starting to stack the deck, and it's only going to get, I don't want to say worse, but they're just getting bigger. You don't need their scale to win. We've talked about this. You need discipline. You need to leverage everything that you can. You need to know your cost per square foot. You need to manage your cycle times, and you need to partner smarter. Don't be at the door of the big guy begging to give the same price as the other big builder. Find your regional guys who will really appreciate your 200 homes a year. Work on your product development. Execute the best you can. Build a good quality home. Get the best people. Get the best trades. Keep your costs in check by overall design and constructability partnerships with your trade partners. And then sell on the locality of it. Here's what I see all too often, and it's getting worse and worse. I hear people talk about the big builders, they crush on margin and they lose on quality. It ain't happening. I have seen divisions of public home builders build bad houses and build great houses. I've seen $1 million custom homes that are a lawsuit waiting to happen. I've seen small builders that build low quality and small builders that build high quality. Look, at the end of the day, for the most part, in a location, you're all using the same labor for the most part. Little bit of like divide when you talk true high-end custom to the entry level, like when we're talking real tradespeople, like, you know, site-built cabinets and like, you know, that's a whole different world. But like drywall, same people. And so what it comes down to is, how do you design your plans to keep your costs as low as possible? How do you make your plans also as efficient to build so they can get built quickly? And how do you buy your material? How do you partner well with your trade partners with, you know, giving them good, consistent starts, even flow? And then how well do you manage that job site? That's what it boils down to. Almost every home builder is basically a general contractor. We call themselves builders, but they have a general license, and they manage the job site and schedule it. Execute well, and build a good quality home by having a good quality checklist that you use and follow on every job site consistently. That's another thing. I've gone to divisions. I've seen builders big and small where there's a community that's different than the rest. You have a division where a builder is not building very, very great because they just have overall not the best leadership at a given market, but you'll still have that one job site where that construction manager on that job site is just a rock star, and just, he's going to build a good house no matter where he works. And then I've seen other ones where you're like, they're, for the most part, that's a well-run organization. VP of operations is on it. Quality is good. Customer service is good. And you got that one job site where everybody knows for some reason that guy probably has no business being a construction manager, but he's been in the industry for, you know, however long. We all like him. He's a great guy, but he doesn't build a good house. So keep all that in mind, because you can execute and you can compete. You don't have to compete on price, but you do have to compete on price. What do I mean? You can't just, I'm the local better semi-custom guy, my faucets are nicer, and I build my house slower, so you should pay me a 20% premium. It doesn't work like that. Nope. What it is you compete, you build the house as quick as they do. You build the house as good or better than they do, depending upon your market. You have good designs, and you have a good value and a good offering for what you do. And then you have the hometown reputation on top of that, where people are like, I want to support you. I want to support this local company. And maybe that house is a little bit more, but they're willing to do it because they know the guy who built it. All right. So listen, we're gonna wrap up and we're gonna say, like, ultimately follow the materials. And what I mean by that is look at what's happening in the industry. Everything I talk about from product development is about using materials wisely, minimizing the waste, and minimizing using materials that we don't need. Don't get lost in the headlines about affordability or interest rates. It's just, you'll drive yourself crazy, okay? Is Lowe's buying distributors? And Buffett is buying builders. Yes, Buffett's got Clayton. He's had Clayton for some time. Lowe's is buying distributors. Yes. They're showing the playbook. You know what they're telling you? That they believe in the demand. They believe in the inherent demand of every aspect of the building industry. They're going into that pro market full force, and they're holding on that they can now actually get into the builder market. So they believe in it. If they believe in it, you should too. The opportunity is massive, but only for the builders and remodelers who are willing to put their ego aside, tighten their numbers, and execute like pros. Here's one last tip that literally just came to me as I was talking to you about this. Lowe's and Home Depot have struggled in some instances to get into the builder market. If that's really the play that they're after, and they haven't really done it in your market, it's gonna happen, but at a different speed in different markets. Maybe even as a small guy who's doing 300 homes a year, you might have an opportunity to go to a Lowe's or a Home Depot, find out who the sales rep is, who's out doing the commercial business, or whatever the new business, and say, hey, you want to partner up together? Because they want to learn. They want to learn how to execute on the builder level. And if they're not currently doing it in your market, they would love to pilot that with a good sized private builder that they don't have to go through all the red tape of corporate. All right. So if you stuck around till the end and you're in a market where Lowe's and Home Depot is currently not going after big builders, try a pilot program with them. They'd be happy to do it. They would love to give you great pricing, and that's your leverage. I'll let you test out your program of working with builders with me, but give me the same pricing that you give the best of the best. All right. So the opportunity is still massive, but you have to be willing to put your ego aside, try new things, develop new product. And so are you going to sit back and wait for stability in the market to rebound? Or are you going to create the opportunities and stability? This is the Builder's Mindset. Keep building smarter. We'll see you next week. You're listening to the Builder's Mindset with Mike DiGiovanni, presented by Amazing Mindsets.